Hi there. How you doing? It's Bill Corcoran back here with part two of our training session for sales here. Now this is going to be more of a field diagram of a typical shell and tube heat exchanger. What you'll see in the field and what is important to take for information or gain for information so we can properly quote and assist the customer. We're going to call it the inspection field checklist. It's sheet one of two. You'll be sent this sheet separately, so if you can't see everything on the video, you'll be able to check it against, as you watch the video, against the forms that you have. It basically indicates done by and the date, customer, contact information, location, and field dimensions taken. In typical shell and tube heat exchanger, your tubes being inside the shell, which is right here. The shell is this component. It's the pressure vessel here. Nameplate typically up top and generally in this area here. Sometimes they're on the side, but you'll see it up in this region here. You have to do sometimes a lot of insulation removal to gain access, but you really should get that. That's important. And we'll get into that later. So you have the shell, you have the head, and you had to have the head gasket, shell gasket, and of course your fasteners. This is all diametrical, so you're getting a cross-sectional view here. You have the pedestals, the feet, right here, that hold it up in, so high. And but so now we're going to go through the field dimensions or reference dimensions that I think are most important. The A diameter, the shell diameter, important. Get that. The B reference is a good dimension to get, as you'll see on a later course that we have, because you're gonna want to have the tube sheet diameter if you can get it. Why do we need that? Between the shell diameter and the tube sheet diameter, it kind of gives us an idea of the most tubes based on their diameter that we could even consider mathematically getting inside this shell or this unit. So these dimensions help us to figure that. What we will do is we'll quote the customer on X amount of tubes, because sometimes we don't exactly know the quantity and none of us have x-ray vision. So we can give them an estimate and the price will be apportionated based on that. It'll change if it goes up or down on the actual number of tubes. When you get it apart, you can find out. So that's the reason for that. So we get that for reference, the B flange diameter. C tube thickness. This is right here, and that's just a matter of how thick is that tube sheet? Is it 2 inches thick, 1.5 inches thick? If we have to make a new tube sheet, it'd be good to know. It's just plain good to know. And it's all part of our computation here anyway, so you should get it. D, tube sheet diameter. We talked about that. That's a resulting dimension that you'll get because you can't really get it easily sometimes with these studs in the way. So, and sometimes you can stick a tape in, get the depth from the outside, multiply it by 2, and then subtract to get the ultimate or, D dimension. Center line of the unit to the floor, E dimension. That is good because not sure if it's like 6 feet up from the ground, 10 feet up from the ground. How much room do our people have to remove this? And when I say that, sometimes we need a cart to bring into the field because the tube bundle is going to come out and it's going to go slide in or be pulled out, I should say, and pushed in. But your E-dimension will give them an idea of a cart. Sometimes we need a cart on rollers that we can actually roll out. So, and sometimes we can't do that if it's way up in the air, but a lot of times a little industrial cart with wheels is all we need. So that dimension is just good for the men in the field to know what they're up against and what kind of rigging they may need or require. In the tube sheet to end of shell, F dimension is super critical. When I say that, you measure from this surface of the tube sheet, right here. It's where the head gasket goes. Notice that the inside joint is the shell gasket side. And that's not, the tubes actually go all the way through the tube sheet. The tube sheet has the cross hatch lines here, and that's where you want to get the dimension from this surface right here, where the tube sheet arrow is, all the way to the end of the unit. Now, keep in mind, this may have insulation on there, and even if it doesn't, your tubes are not going to go all the way to the end. For quoting purpose, I'll usually subtract 2 or 3 inches from what the dimension actually is, figuring that's the longest back to end tube you can have or physically get in the unit. So that helps for quoting purposes. So we'll quote X amount of tubes, say 85 inches long, and longest back to end being 85, and then the thickness of the tube, they just go down from there. But it gives us a good fundamental quoting pinpoint area. Now, if there are less tubes in actuality, we find we will apportionate and the customer won't pay for how many we estimated. But if there's more, they would be quoted, actual for the larger quantity. So it works both ways, if you know what I mean, and I hope that you do. Now, one other thing that could be a result, you have to look at whether or not this bundle can be removed without obstruction. Verify your clearance. There could be a wall that was built or some other items that were installed that eliminate the ability to physically remove that bundle because there's not enough clearance. It's coming out from right to left in this picture here. So make sure there's enough clearance to get the bundle out. If anything else has to be removed, we have to either quote that or the customer has to remove it in advance of us being there. And so you have to look at the situation for removing piping going to the head of the unit. There's going to be an inlet and an outlet here, and you have to look at any other piping, if they're unions, if the piping has to be replaced, if there's gasket joints on any valves or joints. You have to look at all of that in the field. Take pictures. If you can, take pictures, because if you think you're going to remember with everything going on, you're not. So take some photos, that always helps. The other thing would be to look at what's above for rigging. What do you have to rig and take the weight of the bundle out when you have to? After you determine that there's enough room to get it out, you have to rig and get it out. And then, of course, look at what the parameters are at the facility. Where do you have to bring the unit to get it out? Do you have to go downstairs? Is there an elevator? Just what is the situation for bringing the unit out and bringing it in, if we're required to do that. But that's all talking to the customer and finding out what their requirements are. So that's a little bit of this. I do have another sheet that I'm going to send you, and it kind of gives an idea of how to figure the diameters and kind of a sample step-by-step function. And if you, like I said, you couldn't see it on the other, you're going to have that sent to you to look at. And I will see that everyone gets that as well, and that should help. Continuing on, just a little more of a demonstration here of a shell and tube heat exchanger. Again, you've got your tube sheet right here. You've got the head right here. Look at the fasteners. We replace those fasteners, usually B7 studs and 2H nuts right there. A gasket would be right here on the shell side, and then a gasket on the head side. Again, this is the tube sheet. And the tube sheet is going to be X thick. That'll be determined. And then our shell OD. If the shell has to come out, that is a whole different ball game. But, we'll have to deal with knowing what our removal requirements are in the field and how to get it out of there, safely. And but basically, that's how that all works there. And I hope that, and I'll give you a copy of this too. I'm sure you've seen them many times. So that will complete some of this training on this aspect. And our next training will be on some of the things to ask, questions to ask in talking to the customer, what their needs really are, their due dates, almost everything that's possible. And better to have that than not. So we'll get into that in the next session. Thank you very much.